So, can you inherit a tiger? That's the big question the video is about. I'm going to say, hi, Jeff Marsachi, the Plain English Attorney, and welcome to today's video. We're going to be talking about whether or not you can actually inherit a tiger and really any other kind of big cat type of animals. And this question popped into my head because a few weeks ago I was volunteering and working with the Carolina Tiger Rescue, great organization. Tell you a little bit more about that in a bit. And what we were doing though is we were cleaning up this area and getting all of their supplies and everything put together, their kind of building supplies. And organizing it, and even had one of our members build a shelving unit. And it was a great workout outside on a fall day, but they took us on a tour of the Carolina Tiger Rescue, at least certain parts of it, so we could get to see the animals that we were really kind of helping and supporting. Now, the Carolina Tiger Rescue is a place for tigers, leopards, lions, and other big cat type of wildlife, as well as a few others that aren't necessarily considered big cats if there's nowhere else for them to go. Either they were abandoned at some point, a zoo shut down, or there was a lot of effects of some recent legislation that I learned about on this tour called the Big Cat Public Safety Act. And that's what we're going to take a look at, and we're going to specifically focus in on that question at the end. Can you actually inherit a tiger? If you think it's important for educational videos like this to get out there, then please help us out by subscribing to the channel. This tour of the facility, and we got to see the lions, is they do have very a kind of limited lifespan. There's some very, very specific diet there. The big cat's lifespan is usually about the same as regular cats, give or take, depending on the species. And unfortunately, there was a lot of kind of inbreeding in certain types of animals, and the Big Cat Public Safety Act came up. This was really something that had been floating around for quite a while because there were all of these roadside zoos where you would have these dangerous animals, and it got focused on during Tiger King. So that whole phenomenon, if you remember, once the lockdown started, one of the biggest sensations that was streaming was Tiger King, and about these specific types of roadside animal attractions and some of the horrible things that went on, including, it didn't come out and say it, but they'd have the kids go and pet the baby tigers, but they kept breeding those baby tigers, but as soon as they were no longer babies and able to be taken care of, they'd mysteriously die or disappear. And so this act was kind of put in place to help prevent that.
Canines? You got an itch? What's going on? Oh, that face he's making right now is called the Fleming response. All cats make this face, and it is when they want to taste the air to get additional information. They have a special organ in the back of their throat called the Jacobson's organ, which we don't have, and it allows them to taste the air to get a particularly interesting scent.
So, when we're talking about inheriting pets, all pets, there's some very specific things that we have to put into a pet trust or some language in a revocable living trust or a last will and testament that's custom designed for the specific pets that you're leaving to someone who either it's a loved one or just a facility, a nonprofit, or just who's going to make the decision on where this goes. And that we'll talk more about that. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about pet trusts, because I don't want to get too deeply into it. That's probably a good thing for another video. You can actually set up in your trust a way for your pets and other animals to go to whomever you want. Now, here are just a couple of ways of doing it. If you want to keep it flexible just for the transfer of the pets, a lot of times I ask my clients just to keep it simple. Do you trust the people that you have in your trustee list in order to make the decision on just finding them a good home rather than mandating? And usually they go, well, yes. Sometimes there are exceptions where a specific pet needs to go to a specific person. But here's the thing, a lot of pets have a more limited lifespan, and it doesn't cover any new pets if you're just listing, I want this pet to go here, and I want this pet to go here, and this pet to go here. And then it's 5 years later, well, 2 of them have passed on, we got 2 more, and there's nothing there. So just generally saying, any pets, I'm giving a general power of appointment to the trustee to find a home, including potentially taking these pets themselves. Now, another way to do that, well, actually a kind of supplemental way, sometimes my clients want to put a dollar figure that goes along with those particular pets. If the owner's going to take the pet, they're also going to get the money. And you're trusting that they're going to do the best thing possible with that money to use it for the upkeep of the animal. The next way is a lot more complicated because at that point, we're talking about actually spelling out very specific conditions of the trust. Here's what the money needs to be used for. Here's how it's to be used. But now your trustee is stepping in, or you can even have a specific person or persons listed to be trustee over the pet trust portion. They're in charge of the money, but this now means it's an ongoing trust. So it's going to need to get its own taxpayer ID number. It's going to need to have taxes filed each year, and the trustee is going to have to oversee that for the lifetime of that pet. So it's no longer as simple as saying, here's the pet and a dollar figure person, we are trusting you. Sometimes this is exactly what my clients want. They do want to make sure that those pets are taken care of to such a great extent that they want these pet trust provisions and a pet trustee who's going to manage the money, who's probably separate from the person who's going to end up getting the pet and caring for them for the rest of their lives. Another way of doing it that I've had some of my clients do, they'll set up specific arrangements with a shelter or an organization to donate a bunch of money, and in exchange, that organization is agreeing to care for those animals for the rest of their lives. Just an interesting story. I had one client who was going to donate the house to a nonprofit, actually a charitable organization that works with animals, a kind of shelter, but they have to take care of the pets within that house. So whatever pets they have within that house, they have to be cared for, go in a couple of times a day, make sure there's playtime and all this other stuff. We wrote out everything for the lifetime of those pets. And once that was done, the house fully transfers over to the organization, and they can use it as a shelter, sell it and use the funds, whatever. So there are interesting ways that you can get this set up in a pet trust, or at least direct, here's how your pets are going to be taken care of. Now, obviously with a tiger, that's a lot different. There are going to be some very specific things that you have to put in place in order to make sure you're complying with the act, but we'll get to that in a bit. But let's just talk about, in general, about owning exotic pets, because this is a big thing. If you ever went and Googled my name, at some point you're going to come up with the ferret rescue organization I was involved in many, many years ago on caring for ferrets, because they really are really good domesticated pets, but with a limited lifespan. They're very playful in nature. And some people just aren't ready for them, and they go, oh, here's a ferret, great pet. Go ahead and grab the ferret and buy it, and then they realize, oh, we can't take care of it. And so there are other states as well that didn't allow ferrets. So there are, quote, the exotic pets, anything other than cats, dogs, regular turtles, the stuff that you commonly think of being in a pet store. But spiders, snakes, other, quote, exotic animals may have certain regulations depending on which state you're in. Now, what I can tell you is there are also prohibitions that you can purchase some of these animals, but they have to be fixed, and only licensed breeders are allowed to breed them. There's some good reasons for that. And there, depending on state law, there are prohibitions on the sale of these animals, but not necessarily the ownership. So it's kind of this kind of hodgepodge of laws across all 50 states and the jurisdictions. And it's not one specific set of rules, no matter where you go in the country. And I know for the longest time, California was not allowing ferrets as being owned. So, okay, I get that. But now there's, in addition to state rules, well, and what I can tell you for North Carolina is there really aren't a lot of rules. And there specifically weren't any rules on big cats like tigers. So North Carolina instead relied on a local jurisdiction rule. So county by county, they could impose rules on how you can keep some of these animals and whether or not they're prohibited. So you can probably imagine that within Wake County, the capital county, with Raleigh and some other larger towns, keeping a lion on your property as a pet would be a very, very difficult and dangerous thing. And so, well, Wake County's not going to really allow that. So it's outside the counties in the more rural counties where you can have some of these pets, but they have to meet certain guidelines. And now finally, we ended up with this federal legislation, the Big Cat Public Safety Act. So what exactly did the Big Cat Public Safety Act do? Again, a big response to the Tiger King and all of the things that were going on in that. It imposed that you cannot have private ownership of these large cats. So what were the cats that were covered by this? Lions, tigers, leopards, snow leopards, jaguars, cougars, or any kind of hybrids of those particular animals. You cannot have private ownership. So does that mean, oh, you cannot inherit a tiger? Well, wait a minute. The legislation was put in place in December 2022. There are some exceptions to this. So you cannot have any kind of entity exhibiting animals to the public. So you cannot have them being displayed unless it's registered. There's also exceptions for things like state colleges, state veterinarians, wildlife sanctuaries like we have at Carolina Tiger Rescue. So you're allowed to have this non-private ownership, but there is that exception for private ownership, which, reading the act, it can't allow for private inheritance then. So let's talk a little bit about these wildlife sanctuaries. And yeah, Carolina Tiger Rescue does kind of meet these guidelines. It has to be a 501c3 charity. They cannot commercially trade the animals. So that's an important piece of all of this. You can't trade the animals or sell them or buy them. This has to be something where they're kind of donated or brought into the sanctuary. You cannot breed the animals out of a wildlife sanctuary. It's got to specifically be governed by the breeding exceptions, which has a lot more oversight. So you cannot breed the animals. There's no direct contact with the public. Now, doesn't mean they can't be viewed, but there are some very specific limitations on how they have to be cordoned off from the public, how they have to be separated to make sure that there isn't any potential harm. Lots of regulations around this to make sure that a tiger does not get out. And there's also a lot of safety things that are put in place anyway to make sure that the people who are working with them have enough distance. They may look like big, furry, lovable cats, and we'll even put in some clips here of some of the video that I took during the tour. They look like they're cuddly, but they are dangerous. So they have to be treated very, very carefully, because within a second, things can turn from looking like they're going very well to something very, very horrible and could result in grave injury or death, which is why generally it's not a good idea to just kind of have these as pets. Now, I do recall a couple of stories going way back. When I had previously done some work, we learned about, quote, the Virginia sisters, and this is a long time ago. They were three female tigers that were kept together in very, very tight quarters, not very clean quarters. They were actually being raised for slaughter because their body parts, bones, hides, and other stuff was worth an awful lot of money on the black market. And so people were doing this, and they ended up getting raided. But because these three tigers, these female tigers, were put together, grew up together, stayed in that confined area, they had to be housed together or they would go crazy. And you couldn't put anybody else in with them because the three of them would look at it as a threat. So that's the way they lived out their lives at a kind of predecessor to the Carolina Tiger Rescue when it was called something different. They lived there and lived out their lives together, the three of them. So yeah, this was a great organization to do this. So they couldn't have this direct contact, though. They had to have specific kinds of fencing, specific ways of feeding them. You cannot transport or display the animals off-site. And that's an important thing because, oh, well, we have the sanctuary, but we can take them on tour and make money on the tour, taking them to other locations, some other roadside thing. No. That's also cut off. And as for the transportation, yeah, the sanctuaries cannot do the transportation of the animals. There's a specific licensed way that you have to have someone to be able to transport these animals carefully. So that's a whole separate thing. The wildlife sanctuaries don't have to get that type of license. The transporting company has to have that type of license. So now let's get into this private ownership. So we're starting to address whether or not you can actually own a tiger. Well, yes, but here are the very, very big limitations. The big cat, the lion, tiger, leopard, whatever, they had to have been born before the act took effect. So they had to have already been in existence prior to the December 2022 enactment. So they had to have already been here. So this was really a way for Congress to not take away private ownership, because then there would have been a whole bunch of litigation on, the taking of the animals. Congress could very well regulate how things could be done commercially, but simply taking away the tigers and the lions would have had a big uproar and would have had some pretty valid cases that went into court. So they put in these exceptions to make sure that didn't happen. So they had to have been born before the act. And then they gave a meaningful opportunity for people to register with the Department of Wildlife so that they could say, yes, we do have this big cat. We're complying with the act. We're registering it. So here's the animals that we have. And there was a 180-day time limit on that in order to register your big cat with the Department of Wildlife so that you were above board and in compliance with the act. So that was about a 6-month period after the act that you had in order to go ahead and register them. Then there was the prohibitions, same as with the sanctuaries: no breeding, no selling or acquiring animals after the date of the act. So yeah, you own it, but you can't go out and, quote, acquire another big cat. So, and no direct contact with the animals. No direct contact with the public. So you could not, again, put them on public display if it was a private ownership, unless you complied with all of those other rules and regulations around keeping the animals secure and away from the public with, certain footage between the cage and where the public was allowed to stand. So that's the kind of private ownership that was put in place. So, all right. Yeah, you can own a tiger still, but they have those limited lifespans. So eventually it's going to be completely illegal to own one of these tigers or lions or other animals that are covered by the Big Cat Public Safety Act once they just kind of naturally die off. So can you inherit a tiger? That's the big question the video is about. I'm going to say, look, probably. I don't have a very definitive answer. So if there was a tiger, and we're just going to say your uncle owned a tiger and he passed on and put into his trust or his will or some other transfer document that you now own that tiger, I'd imagine you'd have to update the registration with the Department of Wildlife, comply with all of those safety things, no breeding, no other acquiring, no direct contact with the public. You're following all those regulations. I'd say, yeah, you probably can inherit it. But again, it's only for a limited time. If you were going to ask this question in the US and there weren't any other changes in about 10 years, the answer is going to be no, because all of those exceptions, those tigers would have died off by then in that private ownership, and therefore it's eventually going to be completely illegal to own a tiger or other big cat. So if you can't own it, you also cannot transfer it upon death to somebody through a will, a trust, or other ways of devising it. So I hope you found that information useful. As I mentioned, Carolina Tiger Rescue is a great organization if you want to donate or volunteer if you're near the Pittsboro, North Carolina area. Great institution. They always need donations of items that will help with their cause and their mission, and money donations actually really do help them keep everything going on the facility and make sure that the animals have as good a life as possible. So as I always tell my clients, please stay safe, plan ahead, and enjoy life, and whatever you do, make it a great day.